So tonight, with a new Iraqi government in place and following consultations with allies abroad and Congress at home, I can announce that America will lead a broad coalition to roll back this terrorist threat. Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy. First, we will conduct a systematic campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists. Working with the Iraqi government, we will expand our efforts beyond protecting our own people and humanitarian missions so that we're hitting ISIL targets as Iraqi forces go on offense. Moreover, I've made it clear that we will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven. Second, we will increase our support to forces fighting these terrorists on the ground. In June, I deployed several hundred American service members to Iraq to assess how we can best support Iraqi security forces. Now that those teams have completed their work and Iraq has formed a government, we will send an additional 475 service members to Iraq. As I've said before, these American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq. But they are needed to support Iraqi and Kurdish forces with training, intelligence, and equipment. We'll also support Iraq's efforts to stand up National Guard units to help Sunni communities secure their own freedom from ISIL's control. Across the border in Syria, we have ramped up our military assistance to the Syrian opposition. Tonight, I call on Congress again to give us additional authorities and resources to train and equip these fighters. In the fight against ISIL, we cannot rely on an Assad regime that terrorizes its own people, a regime that will never regain the legitimacy it has lost. Instead, we must strengthen the opposition as the best counterweight to extremists like ISIL, while pursuing the political solution necessary to solve Syria's crisis once and for all. Third, we will continue to draw on our substantial counterterrorism capabilities to prevent ISIL attacks. Working with our partners, we will redouble our efforts to cut off its funding, improve our intelligence, strengthen our defenses, counter its warped ideology, and stem the flow of foreign fighters into and out of the Middle East. And in 2 weeks, I will chair a meeting of the UN Security Council to further mobilize the international community around this effort. Fourth, we will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to innocent civilians who've been displaced by this terrorist organization. This includes Sunni and Shia Muslims who are at grave risk, as well as tens of thousands of Christians and other religious minorities. We cannot allow these communities to be driven from their ancient homelands. So this is our strategy. And in each of these 4 parts of our strategy, America will be joined by a broad coalition of partners.
He outlined a strategy, and I think the strategy has a good prospect of accomplishing the goal of degrading ISIS. But I don't think it's capable of destroying ISIS. So let's look at the parts of it. Airstrikes are effective when there are forces on the ground, and that really is the dilemma. Inside Iraq and Syria, there are 3 main forces that you could be supporting. There's the Kurdistan Peshmerga, which suffered setbacks in August, but the units remained intact. With air support, they've been able to retake territory, but they are not going to go significantly beyond Kurdistan, and they've more or less retaken that territory. In the rest of Iraq, there's the Iraqi army, which has largely disappeared since the beginning of the year. We spent billions building it up, and the end result was that the weapons we provided ended up in ISIS's hands. I don't see how you reconstitute that. The president's talking about supporting local forces, and that, in theory, could be effective in the Sunni areas, but it's going to be hard to get them set up, given that ISIS is there. and also that they would have to work with a government that Sunnis absolutely don't trust. They don't see a big difference between al-Abadi and his predecessor, Maliki. And in Syria, the problem with supporting the Syrian opposition is that we don't really have a good feel for who all these people are, and they really have no prospect of defeating Assad, and we don't really know if we can rely on them to fight ISIS, with the exception of, again, in the Kurdish north, the YPG, the Syrian Kurdish military. They have been fighting ISIS for well more than a year, and at least have been holding their own.
Vijay Prashad, I wanted to ask you your reaction to the president's speech and his new policy, and also this whole idea of asking Congress to finance the retraining, once again, a creation of a new Iraqi army after the last one that the United States spent billions on training has basically disintegrated.
Well, I found the speech interesting because the details on Iraq were definitely much more significant than the details on Syria. It was very light on Syria for a good reason. At least in Iraq, as Ambassador Galbraith said, there is the possibility of providing close air support to the Kurdish Peshmerga from Iraqi Kurdistan. There's a possibility of providing close air support to whatever remains of the Iraqi army. After all, they did take back the town of Amirli. But in Syria, there is no real easy group to which the United States can give close air support. You know, the YPG, that is to say the Kurdish force in the northeast of Syria, is backed by the Kurdish Workers' Party from Turkey. The United States sees them as a terrorist organization. So I doubt very much that they will overtly have any coordination with the YPG and the PKK. They've already said they will not coordinate with the Syrian government. That's the second force that could be mobilized to attack the ISIS fighters, particularly as ISIS is moving beyond Raqqa toward the homeland of the Kurdish government. The third major force is the other Islamist opposition. And it's important to point out here that just a few days ago, there was an enormous bomb attack on one of the most fierce fighting units among the other Islamists, and that was Arar al-Shams, which lost basically its entire leadership. The Free Syrian Army is basically a shell of what it had been. It's more in name only. So the idea that the United States is now going to outsource the training of a moderate Syrian opposition fighting force to Saudi Arabia has created, I think, a lot of worry in the region, a lot of concern, because Saudi Arabia's own cutout in the Syrian war has been Jaish al-Islam, which is not known for its moderation in any way. So the United States, if it wants to provide close air support to take on the Islamic State inside Syria, has no effective partners. So in that sense, Mr. Obama's speech yesterday was very confusing and was much more rhetoric than actual strategy.